Welcome to the Greater Phoenix Economic Council's CHIPS Act webinar. This is an ongoing series of webinars to help you and your organization leverage this federal program. As part of the CHIPS and Science Act, the Department of Commerce is overseeing $50 billion to revitalize the U.S. semiconductor industry, including $39 billion in semiconductor incentives and $11 billion in research and development. On February 28, 2024, Chips for America released a Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, to expand semiconductor packaging. The CHIPS National Advanced Packaging Manufacturing Program funding opportunity is seeking applicants for research and development activities that will establish new capability and accelerate domestic capacity for advanced packaging substrates and substrate materials. The CHIPS for America program anticipates approximately $300 million in funding innovation across multiple technologies ranging from semiconductor-based to glass and organics. Funded activities are expected to include, but not necessarily be limited to, basic and applied research, substrate and demonstration device development and production, commercial viability and domestic manufacturing, integrated workforce education and training, and pilot-level substrate production. Today's webcast will cover the recent notification of funding opportunities announced on February 28, which is the first NOFO from the CHIPS for America R&D Program Office. If you are submitting an application for this NOFO, please contact GPEC. We encourage a collaborative approach to the concept paper submission. Contact GPEC and we'll be happy to connect you with the Arizona Commerce Authority, who is leading this effort for the April 12th concept paper submission. Likewise, we encourage you to work with qualified professionals who can assist with your application. We'll be happy to provide you with a list of qualified law firms or advisors. Thank you to our online viewers for taking the time to watch this briefing. My name is Sean Fogarty, and I'm the Vice President of International Business Development for the Greater Phoenix Economic Council. Today's webinar will run for approximately 1 hour. I need to highlight our disclaimer. The information provided on this webinar does not constitute legal advice, and all information, content, and materials available on this webinar and website are for general informational purposes only. Viewers of this webinar should contact their attorney or qualified service providers to obtain advice with respect to CHIPS Act funding and application. Feel free to contact GPEC and we'll be happy to connect you with qualified professionals. The views expressed are those of the individual speakers in their individual capacities. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this webinar are hereby expressly disclaimed. The content is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. Lastly, I encourage you to sign up on the GPEC CHIPS Act web resource page to receive updates. Our presenters today are Michael Patterson, Brett Johnson, and Troy Galan. Mike Patterson is a partner with Spencer Fane, a firm of 425 attorneys in 22 U.S. cities. He helps businesses navigate corporate compliance, securities, and mergers and acquisitions. He has extensive experience in domestic and international mergers, acquisitions, joint ventures, distribution, licensing matters, and market entry strategies. He has recently been working with his team to help multiple companies in the semiconductor industry and the supply chain, whether on CHIPS compliance, leasing, construction, corporate structuring, technology licensing, workforce and employment, and other issues. Mike, take it away.
Thank you. Let's see. Hope you can see that screen there. Today we're talking about the latest NOFO, which I'm calling, they don't count them at the CHIPS office like we do, but I am going to call this NOFO number 4 just to distinguish, but really they're calling it research and development, packaging substrates, and this is the one that was just released February 28th, 2024, which is exactly 1 year after the first NOFO was received, Notice of Funding Opportunity. Let's look back. This one, as of February 28, 2024, seeks applications for research and development activities that will establish and accelerate domestic capacity for advanced packaging substrates and substrate materials. Let's take a review just real quick. Exactly a year prior, the first notice of funding opportunity came out, NOFO 1, let's call it, for projects for construction, expansion, modernization of commercial facilities for fabrication of leading edge, current generation, mature node semiconductors. This is for the big companies, the end semiconductor manufacturing fabs, and this is technically still open. And as you're aware, there's been a lot of these NOFOs released, and a lot of application activity going on, heavy amount of investment in getting these things done, but very few announcements so far, only a handful. And today, I'm sorry, tomorrow, it's the news is that our president and the Secretary of Commerce will be here in Phoenix, and possibly with a big leading edge announcement, we're hoping. So we'll see how that happens, but I expect that it won't be long before on these prior 3 NOFOs there are some announcements coming out, and this is really going to stimulate the whole CHIPS Act activity. NOFO number 2 was in June, and it sought applications for modernization of commercial facilities for materials and manufacturing equipment, but above 300 million. Again, big projects, okay? And that's technically still open. Then in September, they did something very unique, and that was, let's say, call it NOFO number 3, and this is for supply chain, again, for materials and manufacturing equipment, commercial facilities, construction, expansion, modernization, but below 300 million projects, okay? And this was very unique in that they did, just similar to this one, gave a very limited submission of a concept paper, which, very, very small concept papers, small page limit. And then they were going to invite, just like this one, invite people to apply for a full application. And those announcements haven't happened yet. I know Arizona has one of the, if not the largest consortium in the nation that the Arizona Commerce Authority was able to pull together. And I have some folks that are in that as well. And they haven't heard yet, but they're waiting any day to hear from the CHIPS office. Yes, you're invited to now apply, for your full application. So, and the reason I mentioned that's kind of significant because that bears some bearing on what we're going to talk about today. This NOFO number 4, as I'm calling it, for research and development packaging, is to accelerate domestic research and development and innovation. This, by the way, this was telegraphed from the very beginning. From the first NOFO, they said we're going to do, supply chain, and then it'll come, in next fall, and it actually ended up being in the first quarter of 2024. The research and development, long-awaited research and development and packaging. This was coming all along, and now it's here. In advanced packaging materials and substrates. And they wanted to see that translated. They want to translate domestic materials and substrate innovation into U.S. manufacturing, such that the technologies are available to manufacturers, customers, including to significantly benefit U.S. economic and national security, which Troy and Brett have some great comments on that, and have in our prior webinars as well. On that's really the overriding public policy behind all this is let's bring it home. Let's decrease our national security dependence on China and other places in the world where things are maybe not going so good. By the way, I just will comment, China issued a regulation in the last 2 weeks to encourage manufacturers in China to decrease their dependence upon U.S. in particular, Western, but particularly U.S. Innovation and technology, et cetera. So this is a two-way thing here. I hope that this cools off a little bit. The competition there could not, be great, but at least this act is hoping to bring it back. And we want to support the establishment of a robust, sustainable domestic capacity for advanced packaging material substrate R&D, including prototyping, commercialization, and manufacturing. By the way, you're going to see repeated in my piece here, and probably in Troy and Brett as well. They're wanting you to telegraph who are the off-takers for what you're going to create. You know, they don't want, if you're just going to create something that's obscure and maybe, you know, relates to 1% of the market, you'll have less of priority than if you could show this is a really critical new technology that we're doing the R&D for and the advanced packaging, et cetera, that this is going to be critical. And then they also, all along the way, a heavy policy of promoting a skilled and diverse pipeline of workers for a sustainable domestic advanced packaging industry and the R&D. Now, and by the way, they're going to want you to show how you're going to get there with your support structures, et cetera. We'll get to that. Key dates. Okay, 25 days from today, 3 weeks and 4 days from today, the concept papers are due, and they make very clear that it's 11:59 on April the 12th, and not 1 minute later. If you're 1 minute later, they will not read your concept paper. So get it in a day early if you can. And then around May 10th, about a month later, they're telegraphing that they're anticipating that they will have reviewed these largely 10-page papers plus some other components that I'm going to cover. And then they're going to give feedback to those who have sent a concept paper and invite those who will do a full application. And then the invited full applications are due on July the 3rd, day before our 4th of July. Funding availability, they anticipate they're dedicating $300 million for this from multiple funding awards. And an individual award will be funded in amounts up to approximately $100 million. So I guess if there was a really spectacular one, they would go up to $100 million. But I mean, that would really drain the pool a lot. I hope it's more than that, because I know there are a lot of you out there that would like to be included in this. And over a period of up to 5 years per award looking period, not including any voluntary co-investment by you or others. Multi-year funding policy. There's just a lot of disclaimers in here from CHIPS Act that if they approve a multi-year award, they only want you to be relying that they're gonna, you know, provide for the first phase commitment. Additional phases are funded incrementally, and because I think they're saying these disclaimers because there's actually a limited pool here, and so they're trying to telegraph to you, don't have expectations beyond the first phase, et cetera. If the project is accepted to funding, they have no obligation to provide any additional funding in connection with the award granted, again, beyond that first phase or whatever they commit to in your initial award. And on subsequent phases will be contingent upon your satisfactory performance, continued relevance to their mission, to the mission of the CHIPS Act, the goals, priorities of the CHIPS Research and Development Office, and key thing, availability of funds. And it's limited here, $300 million. Project activities that are covered are expected to include, but not necessarily, and Sean mentioned these, but let me go over them again. Basic and applied research, substrate and demonstration device development and production, prototypes, for example, commercial viability and domestic production preparation, integrated education and workforce development, and pilot level substrate production. So I'm going to just say, for those of you who are nano geeks out there that are going to take the USA to the next generation of substrate chips, this is for you. This is your NOFO. Get in there and tell them about what you're going to create to put the US ahead. Okay, and there is and I'll let the guy Troy and Brett talk about this, but patenting is included in this, so I'll let them tell you a little more about that. How to apply. The key deal here is something called a concept paper, okay? That mandatory concept paper is due, again, April 12th, 11:59 or before, and then you cannot do a full application. They'll let you know by about mid-May. A required full application would be due July 3rd. So this is going to move fast. And if you plan to do this, start today if you haven't started already. Full application will only be accepted if you're invited, okay? Eligible applicants may only submit one concept paper. Let me distinguish something. No entity may be included as a subrecipient on more than 2 concept papers. What does that mean? What that means is I might submit as an applicant, but I might identify several other subrecipients who are affiliated with the project, who are going to, either joint venture in or somehow be involved in my team, okay? And those subrecipients can only be included on 2 concept papers, no more than 2. So if there are 5 people, applicants, who only submit one, but they all submit the XYZ company as their subrecipient within their papers, that subrecipient can only get awarded for 2. Okay, so if you're going to include a subrecipient, you need to know what else they may be included on, who else is going to rely on them. Okay, and you should be on alert for amendments to this NOFO. They reserve the right to adjust submission dates, times, other submission requirements. Stay tuned on grants.gov. The concept paper instructions and deadline, again, April 12th, 11:59. They have an email that they encourage, although the NOFO was very complete and had a lot of detail, they do ask you to email research@chips.gov with this language, 2024 NIST CHIPS NAPMP 01 concept papers, and they're going to send you additional instructions and don't wait till the last minute, of course. All right. Contents of your concept paper. Now I'm going to go through various components. Okay. Strict limitations on page counts for the concept paper. There's a cover sheet. It can't be more than 1 page, and that does not take away from your actual concept paper narrative. There's a concept paper executive summary and quad sheet. Each of those can be 1 page, and they don't take away from the concept paper narrative 10. And then there's a table of contents, and that's a 1-pager as well, and does not take away from the 10 on the concept paper narrative. Let's talk about the contents of each one of those 4 components. 5. The cover sheet is a 1-page document that includes all of the following: name, reference number, submission date, relevant technical areas, name of the applicant, name of the project director, principal investigators, and it has contact information. Any major subrecipients, like I was describing, a proposal title, and a point of contact for the applicant to include name, address, telephone number, and an email address. Total funds requested and total proposed co-investment. This is a summary page. By the way, a budget is coming, but they want it all here in summary form. And any statement regarding confidentiality, including proprietary or sensitive business information, if applicable, because there are parts of this that they require be confidential because and able to share with the public. We'll get to that. So this cover sheet does not take away from your concept paper narrative, 10 pages. Then there are 2 other things. Each one at 1-pager is an executive summary, 1-page summary abstract, suitable for dissemination to the public and may not include any classified information. So in other words, you need to be willing that this could be released. And I know in the R&D space in particular, you may be very sensitive about that, but you just cannot include anything in this executive summary that couldn't be disseminated to the public. Okay. And it's a self-contained documents that identifies the name of the applicant, project director, application title, objectives, both technical and education workforce goals. Okay. Next document is also a one-pager, doesn't take away from your narrative 10-page limit, and it's in a format selected by you. So you can make this one-page chart look any way you want it to that you think is attractive and powerful, and must contain a problem statement and the proposed resolution, how you're going to resolve that problem, and the concept of the proposed project, technical objectives, key participants. Okay. Again, neither one of these take away from your narrative. This is the big core piece of this filing. Okay. It is a word processed document of no more than 10 pages and must not include any classified information. It must include the following 4 components: a project impact statement. I'm going to go over these 4. The project impact statement, a project plan, your project team, and your budget estimate. And all of those 4 are in 10 pages. Let's talk about what those 4 pieces are. The project impact statement portion of the concept paper. You have to have a clear problem statement and well-defined project outcomes, which fix that problem. Okay, explaining how both are relevant to the CHIPS R&D mission and goals and the objectives of this NOFO. What were those goals? National security, making a robust components market and R&D and packaging that's going to supply for the future and make our chips domestic industry stronger, and all obviously our labor force and contribute to economic and national security. Now the project plan. This is the second of the 4 pieces in the concept paper. You want an overview of your project plan, how you're going to execute, including the following elements: how the plan, project, and team contribute to advanced packaging needs, R&D needs, and the objectives of this NOFO. Outline of your approach, intended technical areas, and technical targets, project level. Is this going to take some skill for you to keep this non-classified and able to disseminate to the public? Okay, an outline of your plans for transitioning the proposed technology to commercial deployment. So what does that mean? You want to show off-takers who and how this technology is going to directly translate to commercial deployment of the technology, not some esoteric, wow, we want to do research, but it's not going to get to commercial deployment. Okay, got to show how you're going to get it in there. A description of how the proposed project will address each of the evaluation criteria and selection factors, and an outline of the overall education and workforce plan, targeted educational or professional levels. Is this for entry level? Is it for technical employees? Or is it for professional level employees? And the support mechanisms that you're going to include to make sure that happens. And now the concept plan narrative project team. You got to describe your team. A project team comprises all funded entities as well as unfunded collaborators planned for inclusion in a single proposal. So anybody that's participating with you, you need to describe your whole team. People who are funded, people who are not funded. Okay. An unfunded might be a university, it might be a community association or component or incubator that's going to help you, but you need to describe them all. All of the following topics: the capabilities of the lead institution, including required substrate prototyping capability, if applicable. Describe the planned role for additional team members, subrecipients, and unfunded collaborators, and the capabilities that each bring that are essential to the proposal. And as an appendix, they want a letter of commitment. This will not take away from your page limit, of each planned funded or unfunded team member, indicating their intention to participate in capabilities they expect to provide. They want to see a commitment. So you're not naming XYZ company as participating with you, but do they even know about it? You need that. So this is, as you're working on this early, you need to jump with your team and start getting those letters, because it's 3 weeks and 4 days from today. And sometimes it takes people a while to draft their letters. Budget estimate is the last component of your 10 pages of concept paper narrative. You need a clear budget, including phasing. I added that, but they are only going to, they're going to strongly consider only phase one. So, I mean, you may want to consider, how you budget, because that the limitation, you want to be, obviously appropriate, honest, etc. But your phasing, you may only get phase one. And then confirm that the estimated total budget request for the project doesn't exceed their maximum of 100 million. And letters of interest are not the letters of commitment that I just described from your funded and unfunded team members, but is willingness from third parties to support this proposed effort. They could be the nature and importance of their collaboration in their letter. They could be an off-taker. They could be someone who's going to buy this research, or they're going to utilize it. Or they may just be a non-proposing entity wishing to vouch for you, that you've got the knowledge, skills, abilities to conduct this proposed working and execute, or show their express interest, potential customer or user of your technology. And these LOIs do not take away from your 10-page limit. These are an appendix, and they will not take away, nor do the letters of your collaborators, your other people take away, your team members take away from your page limit. You are expected to have a letter of interest from your local state authority in Arizona. That would be the Arizona Commerce Authority. And they do require a week to 10 days to pull that off for you. So, don't be late on that. As Sean mentioned, reach out to GPEC. They'll introduce you to the Commerce Authority, and they'll get you in the groove to get that letter. Final thoughts, reach out to GPEC, look at chips.gov, and there's the Commerce Authority's website. And Heather said she couldn't be here today, wasn't feeling well, but she worked hard on this, and we would be happy to answer any questions along with Sean at Greater Phoenix Economic Council and our experts from Snell, Troy, and Brett.
Well, thank you, Mike, for that very insightful presentation. We greatly appreciate you sharing your thoughts and information on this. Our next speakers are Brett Johnson and Troy Galan. Brett Johnson is a partner with Snell and Wilmer, where he represents businesses and individuals in government relations matters. His practice includes government regulatory compliance, export and import controls, government contracting, and political law. Troy Galan is an associate with Snell and Wilmer, where he represents publicly and privately held companies, as well as government agencies, analyzing international trade and sanctions compliance activity, including risk assessments, due diligence, export licensing, import duties, and potential violations. Brett, Troy, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Mike. Real quick, Troy's bringing up the slides here. Let's go to the first slide. Second slide, actually. the one thing, and Mike did a great job, but when I was going through the NOFO as well as some commentary that was about the NOFO, I wanted to make sure that everybody, as they're putting together their concept papers and maybe their applications going forward, or they're getting together their teams or consortiums to be able to maximize their advantages here, it's still important to go back to the other 3 NOFOs and see how these are all working together. And we're going to get into a little bit more basics about how this is kind of maybe an easier NOFO than the other ones, obviously with some of the same caveats. But the reality is that they're still based on on the 6 main criteria that came from the first NOFO. And most importantly, as we put there, is the economic and national security objectives. I went through the NOFO, and I think that the national security was referenced about 76 times in this NOFO too. So as part of that criteria on identifying national security and obviously bringing it back as a domestic base here in the United States, a domestic source, your concept papers and your application should really try to hit on those items, as well as explain areas where, if there are going to be potential national security concerns, what the company plans to do or the consortium plans to do to address it. So I wanted to make sure we highlight that, because it's not just what is the government going to do for you, it's what also the government's you're going to do for the government. So making sure that you have these in mind as you're going through the process. Next slide, please. So we're going to go through a more detailed overview on some of the aspects that Mike did not cover. But the one thing that we wanted to make sure that it was very clear is that the concept of cooperative agreements or similar transaction agreements as part of the funding instruments that are going to be coming out of this NOFO. So there's a lot more flexibility on how the government can structure these opportunities. And you're going to have to understand that from a budgetary standpoint on the front end to be able to tie in more typical government contracting, government grant activities as to what is allowable and not allowable. So if you've done government contracting before, this is probably not going to be new for you. And quite honestly, you likely have a leg up if you've done traditional government contracting or grant work in the past. However, for those that are new to this, especially as foreign partners arrive in the United States and set up domestic shops, it's really important to understand what you're getting yourself into in regard to the costs. The other issue is ensuring that you're not losing money or leaving money on the table, because there's a lot of things that are allowable costs that might not be allowable necessarily in a commercial cost reimbursement scenario that are 100% allowable here. Most notable are obviously a lot of the socioeconomic requirements that are part of the CHIPS Act, and obviously all 4 of the NOFOs dealing with workforce development, training, small businesses, and other opportunities. So please make sure you're understanding what those costs are. Again, this is a more traditional government contracting type realm than the other NOFOs who were more on the commercial side, I guess. But just keeping that in mind and trying to weave in some of those concepts where appropriate, both in your concept paper as well as your application. Next slide, please. So this goes what my comment was before about eligible uses. Now, we're going to concentrate only on a few of them, obviously highlighting again national security. But one thing that the government through this NOFO has reiterated, as well as on speaking about CHIPS Act, is the protection of intellectual property in the United States. Now, it's very important to wrap that concept into your papers as well as your pre-application, is what are you going to do to protect the R&D that the government is paying for? Now, it's expected as part of any type of agreement in this context that the United States is going to have its typical type of IP protections, that if the government is paying for it, they're going to have rights to certain IP in the future. You would technically own it, but the United States does not have to pay for that IP twice. So just keep that in mind as you're going through the grant agreement and truly understanding what your IP rights are. Not only is the government making you identify how you're going to protect IP up front, you want to do that anyway because you don't want to be giving away, the whole house into the government after the fact. So really understanding your IP rights is important. The more general aspects of the funding uses, of course, as to kind of how can I plug in this money? Obviously, applied research, device development and production. Most importantly, domestic production preparation, ting, 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 that goes to national security as well as economic security. So those are that's a major area. And then we just mentioned the socioeconomic aspects of the workforce education and training. But again, domestic is very important, but that'll flow into what we're going to talk about in a second. Next slide, please. What we're going to talk about specifically is in regard to compliance and why it matters. Basically, there are not just on the IP side, but there's extensive compliance requirements all the way around. And there's going to be some compliance triggers or checkboxes that you're going to have to do, and it's not lip service. You really have to understand what those compliance requirements are and ensure that that is then built into your cost, so you're ensuring that you're going to be able to get it under those cost reimbursement standards that I mentioned before. One thing I learned early in my career, federal monies or government monies in general are never free. There are always strings attached to it. We did mention a minute ago about the intellectual property rights and whether or not the government's going to have to pay a royalty in using that IP in the future. But you should make sure that you're identifying the resources to make sure that compliance has actually occurred. In addition, there's the NOFOs that are promoting foreign supply chains, especially to the extent it domesticates here in the United States. It's also talking about utilizing allies and other aligned countries, primarily against China, in this context. And as such, there's going to be other regulatory frameworks that are built into the grant agreement, which is basically follow the law, but they're actually going to require robust compliance programs around it. So export controls, that's not that's just doing business in this area. Need to understand how the Export Administration regulations and possibly the ITAR come into play. CFIUS is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. To the extent, as we're going to talk about in a minute, some of the foreign issues back and forth, you're going to have to make it work. And then for the False Claims Act, of making sure that you're on the government contracting side. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Troy to talk about the research security plan.
Thank you, Brad. So the research security plan, one of the main things that we've seen in this NOFO is there is a heightened emphasis on these compliance requirements that Brad and Mike have walked us through so far. And as opposed to previous NOFOs here, you will have to submit a specific matrix where you list the compliance aspects that are required by the NOFO and how you're complying with those requirements. One of the main ones will be this research and security plan, where it again highlights that the Department of Commerce is particularly concerned with national security as it relates to this R&D NOFO. So what are those requirements? You will have to submit policies and procedures that address the following. And again, they do expect that this will be detailed and thoughtful and applicable to your specific R&D project and to your specific industry. One of the things that they will be looking at is your foreign talent recruitment. What does that mean is if you're hiring students out of college, even if they are out of the United States, whether they have a different nationality that may be of concern to the Department of Commerce. Here in the NOFO, they refer to countries of concern, but we know that that really means China. They will also ask that you look at and explain your conflicts of interest, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But overall, that basically means any affiliations that you have with governments having a history of IP theft. And again, that is hinting towards China. In terms of research security, that is talking about cybersecurity, because this will be R&D. They will expect applicants to have a robust security protocols for their computers. And what they want to be looking for specifically is training, knowing that the people that will be working in these projects will know, click on a link by accident and allow a virus to come in and all that information that the US government is funding to be stolen by our adversaries. A point of contact, as Mike mentioned, one of the people that you need to list is who they can contact, but they're also looking for an additional point of contact that would be, we suggest, a compliance officer, and that will be a person that they can reach out to regularly in case there are any concerns with your research security plan. We'll talking a little more in more detail about that conflict of interest. In this case, it will be a national security risk determination. As Brett mentioned, if you have been involved in government contracting before, you may be familiar with different types of conflict of interest that the government looks at. But again, here, this will be a national security based risk determination. So what will they be looking at? The overall standard is undue foreign influence or interference with the applicant. They're specifically looking at any associations that the applicant may have had with foreign competitors or governments that had a history of theft, racial misconduct, or just basically taking US technology out of the country without the proper controls. Again, that refers particularly to China. When it comes to these associations, that will include universities, it will include any professional societies, again, foreign talent recruitment programs, and it's not limited. They will be looking at any foreign contacts that the applicant may have had. Again, as this review goes forward, they'll see there are any military applications for your R&D project to the extent that they're only civil. That will probably mitigate the government's concerns, but again, depends on what you're doing. That assessment may look a little different. The review that they will conduct will be for about 10 years for the period immediately preceding the applications. So that means that even if you don't currently have any associations with foreign countries of concern, if you had them in the last 10 years, that will have to be addressed as part of your application and as part of the review process for conflict of interest. A little bit more detail as to what this review will look like. They will review the applicant, meaning the actual entity that is applying. As we know, individuals are not able to apply independently of an entity. They will be looking at the ownership structure all the way up. That will mean even shareholders for those private entities, any owners that will have any control over the company. They will also look at it in the other direction, which will be subsidiaries to the extent that applicants have subsidiaries in China. Again, other country concerns that would also be reviewed. Mike talked about those unfunded collaborators as well. So anybody that will be listed on your application, and even if they will not be specifically listed, but you intend to use them, that will be subcontractors. They will want to look at those as well. And other obligations, it means financial obligations to the extent that you have a high level of debt in a country of concern or your leverage, aspects. The Department of Commerce will want to know how its funds and the R&D that will be funded by them will be protected from any obligations. In terms of covered individuals, they will be looking really at anybody that has a substantial contribution to the project. Of course, anybody listed on the application will be reviewed, but some of the individuals that the NOFO particularly cares about are those that are non-US citizens and those that do not have green cards. Again, even if you have workers or researchers on a high-level visa, temporary visa, work visa, H-1B, if they're not permanent residents, they will be looked at in greater detail. These covered individuals will have to be listed in the application by you, but ultimately it is a determination by the Department of Commerce of who they will review. So don't be surprised if ultimately they come back and say that there's a longer list of individuals that they want to conduct these national security checks. Ultimately, as part of this conflict of interest, the NIST, that's the office issuing the NOFOs through the CHIPS program office, will issue a risk determination level, low, medium, or high. That does not mean because you have a high level that you will not qualify for funding. It just means that the government will likely expect that you have heightened security, national security guardrails to address those concerns that they may have. Talking about cybersecurity that relates to the training aspect that I mentioned before, the key that they will be looking at, again, as part of that matrix will be that you're addressing cybersecurity for all the aspects of the application. So when you're planning for R&D, what computers are you using? What networks are you using? Are they safe from any foreign interference? Again, through the R&D, that will probably be the R&D process, that will probably be the most important part. But it will also be curious how you're protecting all your cyber from any cybersecurity threats. and through the implementation and any oversight, meaning that once the funds have been dispersed and you're actually conducting the R&D, how are you protecting that information from, again, foreign actors? The NOFO indicates that they will be looking at your cybersecurity practices and they will be evaluated based on the NIST cybersecurity framework. They will also be looking at some guidelines that have been published by the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and the NIST cybersecurity framework. Highly recommend that your IT personnel take a look at this to understand if your current IT software and protocols meet these requirements. If to the extent you're already NIST certified, we encourage you to note that in your application. That will give the government and of course the NIST office reviewing a bigger sense of comfort that you're meeting their requirements. And similarly, if you're FedRAMP authorized and you have those higher government approved standards of cybersecurity protocols in place, that will help. It's not a requirement, but if you have them, we encourage you to highlight them in your application. Another consideration that we wanted to highlight in this specific NOFO as it relates to R&D, research and development, is the use of the phrase emerging technologies. This phrase is used throughout government regulations a lot, but in particularly it's noted as part of the definition of critical technologies in the regulations for the Committee of Foreign Investment in the US. Some of them are some more broad strokes, and those involve generally artificial intelligence, advanced telecommunications, autonomous vehicles. So to the extent you're involved in anything that will be considered an emerging technology, this will apply to you. What this NOFO points out to the applicants is that previously, when the government was looking at advancement in semiconductors, the critical item was miniaturization. That is how we've advanced our semiconductors in the United States and really around the world. But now what the Department of Commerce is saying is that advanced packaging, which will be funded as part of this R&D too, will also be an emerging technology. That's an official expanded definition, but it gives you an idea of what the government is looking at. And why that may be relevant is if you do receive funding through this NOFO through the Department of Commerce, and you're also expecting, whether it's relatedly or completely unrelated, to have any type of foreign investment transactions, that may be a foreign purchaser of stocks, anything that will give them more rights than basically just buying stock from the stock market, that may lead to some additional requirements separately from the CHIPS Act, and that would be mandatory declarations through CFIUS. So in sum, what the reason why this is relevant is if you do take that CHIPS Act funding and you do engage in that R&D and you're portraying to the government that you're engaging in this advanced research and development, be aware that that may have later implications to other regulatory issues such as CFIUS jurisdiction in the future. Foreign partners, I will kick it back to Brett to talk a little more about this.
Thank you, Troy. And obviously, the CFIUS aspect of this is a great little segue into the foreign organization issues, because unlike the other NOFOs, there is specific participation that foreign organizations can be part of the team. Obviously, if they're sub-recipients or contractors. This is going to be important because especially the reality is that so much of this was done outside the United States previously, that it's unrealistic in a very short period of time to bring this all back domestically. However, again, as we must keep on reiterating, is on the China side about it. Now, I appreciate Mike's comment early in the presentation about eventually maybe decreasing the war of the words between each other, but definitely the policy of the United States right now is decoupling. China, as Mike mentioned, has also put out its own notice about decoupling from the United States. So we have to take that serious. I don't know how serious the Chinese side is on their regulation, but the United States is very serious about it, and it percolates through all of the different agencies, not just Department of Commerce. Although in this context, the Department of Commerce is going to have the ultimate approval authority in this context, which makes sense. I mean, they also have the Bureau of Industry Security, which has the export controls. They obviously have NIST, which is managing the CHIPS program. So they're in a perfect position to be able to handle this, especially as one of the committee members on CFIUS. So you have to be able to show that the foreign partner is essential because there's no equivalent U.S. partner, and that's a pretty broad category. You can ram a truck through that. So even if there are some U.S. domestic based competitors in that area, to the extent that your supply chain has essentially relied on them, and you're showing as part of your concept plan how you plan to grow over the grant period and into the next 10 years, as Troy was mentioning, you're going to be in a much better shop. The protocols that, again, having to reiterate the U.S. IP protections that are in place, but with those foreign partners, how are you protecting your IP in those countries too? So there's the Madrid Convention that many of you may know about in regard to global IP protection, but understanding that how you're going to lock this down and being able to articulate it is going to be a different issue. We already mentioned, I hit it on it several times, the prioritization of domestic production. Again, hit on it several times about not having China as part of the supply chain. And that goes with your partners, your subcontractors, or other entities in foreign countries. It can't be a shell game where, there's an entity in Vietnam or Malaysia or South Korea or Japan or even Holland that basically is utilizing resources in China and then funneling it through those other countries into the United States. You really have to pull the thread on that entire supply chain for your partnerships. And again, there has to be an agreement of the foreign partner to possibly go under a national security review. Tying in with what Troy just talked about, you may also want to build in the whole CFIUS review process as part of your agreements, because again, that's a parallel process that still might have implications here. Next slide, please. Okay, but as you're preparing this as part of the foreign partner analysis, as we just mentioned, you're going to have to understand how all of the other regulatory environment surrounding these programs comes into play. So the export compliance program, we've mentioned it several times, but how are you screening? How are your partners screening to ensure that they're not doing business with people that the United States does not allow that to happen? How are you training internally as well as your partners, including your foreign partners, to ensure that all the export protections are actually being followed? You want to be able to try to shift in your agreements with your partners some of that risk and some of that liability, especially if they're in foreign countries, because you don't want to be necessarily stuck with that. But if you don't have your own compliance program in place, it's going to be hard to do that. Understanding the other supply issues and mostly know your customer, know your supply chain. I put up CTPAT as well as AEO here. CTPAT is how you bring products quickly into the United States because your foreign manufacturers or your foreign partners have compliance programs in place that are meeting certain criteria. Mexico has its own program called AEO. The European Union has its own program also called AEO. No relation. A little bit more stringent than CTPAT actually, but allows you to have they have cross-reference and cross-recognition. So that is something that you might want to highlight in your concept plan as well as your application, that, hey, these are also CTPAT vendors. The great thing is that we know through customs that those companies have already been vetted. We've already mentioned that watch your supply chain running through China. The CFIUS issues that Troy mentioned, I also, because you're talking about joint ventures, a lot of people think, well, that's foreign ownership, foreign, but it also deals with joint ventures or any type of teaming agreement, especially if there's a technical transfer of data. If the technical transfer of data is into the United States, less of a concern, but if the technical data from the United States is going out, big concern, and you want to make sure it's covered. For those who are planning on diving into supporting the national security framework, Department of Defense or Department of Homeland Security or Department of Energy, keep in mind that as you're building out your supply chains and you're identifying these foreign partners, how are you going to be compliant with the Buy American Act or deal with customs and duties? And that might be part of the messaging that you're going to intake to as part of your paper, as well as your eventual application, is that you're going to be compliant with all these government contracts, because that's going to be an easy support for the domestication of this area. And finally, intellectual property issues we've hit on multiple times here, so we'll skip that one and move on. We're going to talk 1 minute about the National Security Decision Directive, NSDD 189. It talks about fundamental research. A lot of people try to get around some of the government contracting requirements or export controls related to fundamental research. But this NOFO specifically is going to have some intake on what fundamental research is. And then again, unlike other fundamental research that may be publicized on the web or put out there for public consumption, it's going to be in this context, if the U.S. government is funding it through the CHIPS Act program, that the Department of Commerce is going to have sole discretion to determine fundamental research. Do we think that part of the ITAR and the EAR, Export Administration Regulations, concepts around fundamental research are going to come into play? Absolutely, but you have to make sure that you understand that that's going to come into play as you're doing your analysis. So hopefully you're making that as part of your risk analysis going forward. But again, in practice, even though it might be in the public domain as fundamental research, you still might have to apply some export controls as a matter of contract versus just regulatory compliance. Next, please. That is all we have. Thank you very much, Mike and Sean and Troy, for including us on this. This has been a great opportunity. If you have questions, again, go to GPEC. They're going to be a good first place to start on this. Compliance is key. And don't forget my one moniker, which is basically that no government money is actually free. So there's always strings that are tied to it. And understanding that on the front end is going to make your concept paper and your application better. And you're going to ensure that you're not leaving any monies on the table, as well as understanding the risks of going forward with this plan. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sean.
Great. Thank you very much, Brett and Troy, for the comprehensive presentation. As we wrap up, I would like to ask Mike or Brett if you have any final remarks.
I just gave mine. Make sure that you have the compliance on the front end. A lot of people think compliance is a secondary to the budget and the economic analysis and what you actually plan to do. But there's a lot of compliance that goes into this and understanding it. The last thing I'll say is when you're putting together your concept paper and your application, it's, in our opinion, very important that you're parroting back to the government the language that's actually in the NOFO. You might have a marketing team that's very good about commercial projects or finding joint venture partners, but if you don't have that key language that you're repeating back to them and actually meaning it, not just saying it, meaning it, I think that your application or your concept paper is going to not be on the top of the pile. Let's put it that way. Mike?
Yeah, on the one side, they've really done great with the last NOFO and this one by reducing down that you only really need this 10-page concept paper and some additional, the cover page, etc. That's good. So you don't have to spend the extra thousands and thousands and thousands to put together a 75-page plan, all the exhibits and everything. That will come in your full application. However, your 10 pages has to be potent and hit hard, and like Brett said, you need to parrot back to them, use the code language that they used in the NOFO, and you want to get invited to come back for that full application. And I would say get started early. If you're going to do this 3 weeks and 4 days from today, so you need to start right now. You have a lot to do, and getting all those letters from all the parties, reach out to GPEC or any of us, and we can put you in contact with the right people and get those letters moving, because you're going to need them. You don't want someone doing that on the last day.
Well, thank you all. Hopefully, this webinar will spark an interest among our viewers to learn more about the CHIPS Act and how your company can apply for funding. Again, we encourage all firms to engage with qualified professionals to assist you with the CHIPS Act funding opportunities and application. Please contact GPEC if you have any questions or need introductions to any service providers. I'm going to share my screen very quickly. I would, again, encourage all viewers to visit the GPEC CHIPS Act web resource page, where we list all the latest information and resources related to the CHIPS Act. Be sure to subscribe to receive the latest updates to that webpage. I also want to mention that the chips.gov website has links to their Chips for America webinars. For companies that are planning to submit an application, GPEC can also provide an economic impact analysis that can help you quantify the impact of your project. Finally, thank you, Mike, Brett, and Troy, for sharing your insights on the CHIPS Act application. We appreciate the support from Spencer Fane and from Snell and Wilmer. And we'd like to thank all of our viewers for joining us today. We hope you found the briefing informative and valuable. This concludes our briefing. Thank you.